back responding to some of the issues that 50 Shades of Grey reveals about culture. It's a book breaking records for sales, and it's about female bondage and domination. Shannon Ethridge, the author of The Fantasy Fallacy, is helping us navigate how to put our fascination with sex into God's design for our lives. Shannon, you believe God wants to enhance our sexual pleasure. The Bible has many sexual encounters in it. What makes you so sure God's about pleasure?
Well, we have to remember that the gift of sexual intimacy in marriage was given to us before the fall of man. So there's absolutely nothing sinful about it in any way, shape, or form. It was only after Satan got a hold of it and started running with it and distorting it in so many different ways. So we also have to look at the fact that God gave us very vivid imaginations. And I believe that those imaginations can certainly fuel our marriage bed. It's one of the most primary ways that women need to tap into because for women, orgasm is about 95% mental. And so all of those things add up to the fact that God is on our side. He wants us to have rewarding, fulfilling, pleasurable sex lives. And for us to think otherwise that's just not God's character and nature.
And you mentioned the marriage bed. We don't talk about that anymore. You know, like old girls like me, the first guy we kissed was our husband.
Yeah.
But the marriage bed is really a precious protection that God has put in place for peace, for harmony, for just like, yeah,
absolutely.
No regrets.
And I've been on both sides of the fence. I was a very promiscuous teenage girl, and so I came into my marriage 23 years ago with a lot of baggage. But my husband was a virgin at 26 years old when we married. And so just to see the difference between what sex was like with men who had no commitment, no loyalty to me, and sex with a man who has pledged his entire life to totally ministering to me. The difference is day and night.
Okay, I want to ask you about your background a little bit, but I first want to give the audience a chance because I know there's some questions here about the way you've been stretching our imagination about God in the next level. Okay, we've got a question here.
Hi. I just want to know, because sex is such a taboo in the church, how do you bridge this new thinking that we have, right, with the acceptance of this new, fantasy novels that are out? How do we make that bridge? Because it's so taboo, and people, of course, would say, right, that's not what church girls do, whether married or unmarried, right? So,
see, I definitely think that we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I do not encourage people to read the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy. However, the fact that society is abuzz with the topic of sexual fantasy, we need to latch onto that as the church.
The church is the go-to source for education on this.
It should be the go-to source, but it's not. When we released the Fantasy Fallacy, so many pastors and counselors said, well, now, wait a minute. We've never known this about sexual fantasy before. How come no one has ever told us? We haven't been taught in our counseling school, in our seminary studies. No one's ever taught us this. And so I think that it is high time that the church learn these things about their own sexual fantasies and help other people come to an understanding where theirs comes from as well. I think that we will do society a huge service to offer that understanding to the world, but first we have to understand it ourselves. We have to overcome our own fears and hang-ups about studying our own sexual fantasies.
You know, there's this wonderful passage, one of my favorite in the Bible, Psalm 139, search me and know me, oh God. So we're not saying just go out there and have your fantasies for no purpose, but search your fantasies. Ask if God has got something to heal in you.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong as a married couple to do some fantasy with each other to
be able to tap into those areas. Absolutely. And actually, there was a gentleman who contacted me right after the book released, and he said, can I tell you how this book has impacted me? He said, for 25 years, sex has been an issue with us. Year one, she caught me looking at pornography. She's always taken it personally. She's assumed that I don't think she's beautiful or sexy. Nothing could be further from the truth. But he said, I realized that my addiction to pornography has been rooted in something that I've never told anyone. He said, when I was a teenager, I was... the 4 different men attempted to sexually molest him, either pastors, youth pastors, or teachers. And he said every single time I would attempt to run away, which was the appropriate response, but he never told anybody, so he never got help. He just stuffed that down. He didn't acknowledge the feelings and the emotions that came with that. And so what he taught himself was that intimacy with a human being is very, very dangerous. And so intimacy with a computer screen seemed far less risky, and that's where his addiction started.
And we're not talking here about encouraging that kind of intimacy with a computer screen. What we're saying is...
We're encouraging intimacy with a real human being. If you have a hang-up having real intimacy with a real human being that you're married to, there's a reason for that. Look at your history and figure out Where have I been traumatized? Why does pornography look more appealing to me than a real live human being with a real relationship?
I want to ask about your own addiction to sex and relationship. How'd you get through it? What happened?
Well, I was totally oblivious to the fact that there was even a term called sex and love addict during the years that it was raging. But from the ages of 15 to 19 years old, my life was basically one sexual relationship after another. And how God got my attention that something needs to change is that I was working as a mortician in a funeral home. And I was shocked at how many people I was embalming who had either died of AIDS or committed suicide when they got an HIV positive diagnosis. And I remember standing over the embalming table thinking, there but for the grace of God go I. But I white-knuckled it for several years. I got married to this great guy, and I thought, okay, this is going to put the wedding band on my finger, and it's going to solve all my problems, but it didn't change anything except my last name. Within a couple of years after the new wore off, I started feeling that overwhelming longing to go looking for love in all the wrong places again. So I went through 6 months of intense group and individual counseling to get to the root issues of why have I looked for love in those wrong places, and how can I find it in the right place with God and my husband before I ruin my family?
A lot of people find it very difficult, well, let's say everybody finds it difficult to live by God's boundaries that He put around to protect ourselves about sex. What do we do about that? Those are tough boundaries.
Well,
it's the marriage bed.
But we've bought the world's
it.
lie that it has to be forbidden fruit in order for it to taste sweet, and nothing could be further from the truth. The sweetest fruit that I have ever tasted in my life is healthy, vibrant sex with my husband, again, who's forever committed to me. What the world has to offer pales in comparison. And our message to our kids has been, we're not telling you to save sex until marriage because sex is dirty, nasty, and bad. We're telling you to save sex because it's so good that it's worth the wait.
But what about all the single people? You just can't turn this thing off. And the marriage bed, we've talked about
Many
a lot.
wish they could.
Yeah, okay, so what about that? You can't just turn it off.
You can't. There's not a switch that we can flip to just desensitize us completely to our sexuality. Again, all the more reason why we need to embrace our sexual fantasies, our sexual longings, not act them out outside of marriage, but take those to God and ask, what is there anything that I'm doing to fuel this artificially? Is there anything in my life that needs healing? Or maybe it can just light a fire into you to get out there and find that spouse that you've been longing to have instead of waiting for them to magically appear at your apartment door.
You're going to get email on that.
I know.
Okay, The Fantasy Fallacy. I love this book. Shannon, thank you. Coming up, advice from a gay celibate on sexual fantasy. That's coming up in the wrap. What difference does a holy imagination make into sexual fantasy? Well, great church leaders have written about this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said purity is not about the suppression of lust, but rather reorientating one's life to a larger goal. Gay celibate and Catholic priest Henri Nouwen said, we must start by realizing that our restless hearts, yearning for perfect love, can only find that love through communion with the one who created them. I hope today's episode helped you think on God's welcome on sexual issues. We've put a link on the website to the book we've discussed today, The Fantasy Fallacy, and there's other great resources for Christian thought for sex. So go to contactswithlorna.com, and we also have help standing by for your emails and Facebook notes. It's been a little bit controversial today. That's okay. Write to us. We can handle it. For all of us at Context, thanks for watching, and join us next week for Life Beyond the Headlines. Wow.